Hey everyone, it's your girl Maddie here, aka Beavermont, and today I have the pleasure of being joined by Michael of Vacuous, whose latest record, In His Blood, is coming out February 28th off of Relapse Records. Uh, Michael, I'm so glad we were able to get this scheduled. Thank you for joining me. How are we doing? I'm assuming it's sometime in the evening for you.
Yes, yeah, it's evening. It's dark outside. Thank you for having me. Yeah, doing
Yeah,
well, thanks.
yeah. Um, Well, first off, how does it feel to be putting out a record on the iconic, Relapse Records?
I mean, it's still kind of surreal to all of us, I think.
Hmm.
It's also like just kind of a relief that we can talk about it now because we've known about this for a really long time. Like this record's been done for ages and we've just been sitting on it.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, I think it's like none of us really ever expected to have anything to do with Relapse. Like Relapse was the first label that I kind of became aware of as a record label being a cool thing to follow as a teenager, being like, oh, this is how you can discover music. That was through
Mm,
Relapse, like when I was, getting into Mastodon and Dillinger Escape Plan as a teenager and that stuff. So
yeah.
yeah, it's really cool and very surreal.
You say you've been kind of sitting on this. Did Relapse kind of ask you not to kind of unveil this until it was like ready that you were on that label?
Yeah, I mean, like obviously they had like a date set for in the future for them to announce that we'd signed to them.
Hmm.
And like even leading up to that, there was like the period where they sort of made us an offer, and this being like a proper like record deal versus a handshake agreement that we'd had with previous labels. Like there was actually a contract that needed to be
Yeah.
reviewed and all that stuff. So yeah,
Now, if I remember right, your last record was it Mesaku Unoho or Dark Descent?
yeah,
Was that
it's
was that
both.
a very different situation then?
Yeah, that
Yeah.
was like a lot more casual. I mean, they're like well established and well respected
Mm,
labels, but like, I mean, hopefully they don't mind me like divulging their business plan. But essentially, when you work with a label like an underground label like that, they'll say like, "Hey, I'm pressing like 1,000 copies of your album. You'll get this amount as
hmm.
kind of we'll just send these records to you and you sell them, and that's payment for your album." But a bigger label, it's like, you get an advance and there's all these
Yeah.
like percentages and it's way more complicated and involved. So
Hmm. Yeah.
yeah.
I mean, you're right though. Dark Descent isn't like an unknown label. I own plenty of Dark Descent records, but like, they are not.
Yeah.
They're not as established as Relapse. They don't have the longevity.
Well, the difference with like those two labels is like Dark
Yeah.
Descent is basically one dude running it out
Yeah.
of his basement, and like
Mm,
same with Misako. So
yeah.
versus Relapse, to have a team of like every time I'm speaking to them, it's a different person kind of situation.
Sure. Yeah. Um, when I listen to Vacuous, both your last record, Dreams of Dysphoria, and this new one, In His Blood, I get the sense that this is a death metal that is kind of claustrophobic. It has a harsh atmosphere to it. You're kind of going for that doomier kind of death metal sound. Is that the
Mm.
intention? Is that what you were wanting, listeners to get out of your band?
Yeah, like the atmosphere has always been pretty
Yeah.
important to us, and I guess like kind of the emotional aspect of it. A
Mm-hmm.
lot of death metal tends to be like quite like present this sort of like emotionally dry like facade of like I don't know like you know kind of relying on the I don't know usual like horror film tropes or whatever. And
Sure.
yeah, we're into different kinds of music, and we're just kind of using death metal as sort of like the vehicle for a lot of different
Yeah.
things. But yeah, I'm glad that's come across.
Mm-hmm. Um, I remember Dreams of Dysphoria. I talked about on this channel back a couple years ago, and I remember seeing being on kind of the underground metal blogosphere and what have you not, and seeing it within the underground that record getting some praise. And I'm wondering for you as a band, following that up, is that stressful to feel like you have to like follow up something that people like? Does it feel like you don't want to disappoint? Is that added give an added pressure?
Um, I guess yes and no. I don't know. I mean, it's not like it blew up and like, changed our lives and like we didn't make tons of money or anything off it. But
Sure.
yeah, we knew that some people liked it. But ultimately I think yeah, we were gonna do our own thing
Hmm.
either way. And like, the relapse thing came into the picture way after In His Blood was recorded. So like that wasn't a consideration at all in terms
Yeah.
of approaching it. No, I don't know. I think in terms of writing In His Blood, if anything, we wanted to go the opposite direction, where like Dreams of Dysphoria is very kind of drawn out and free form, and it's got these like meandering songs. We wanted to go
Yeah.
for something that was like really bold and direct, like kind of sort of the first songs we wrote were like the title track that's like really just like doesn't waste any time, just kind of
Hmm.
goes right into it kind of thing. Yeah.
Yeah. Um, I think that even kind of maybe the what you're talking about, the differences, or even like in the album cover, Dreams of Dysphoria had this very, bleak white and black cover, like very much a,
Mm.
a typical death metal cover. It was like empty and
Mm.
hollow, where this one is very sharp. It's very like
Yeah.
in your face and like you said, direct. Yeah. With
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
bright
Yeah.
red.
Exactly. And even like down to sort of the title and stuff like
Yeah.
we've used fancy words other dreams of dysphoria and like catabasis, and people maybe
Yeah.
assume that we were like more well read than we were, and we're like we'd like something to be just like really just like direct surface level in terms of how we present it.
Hmm. Now, talking about the cover, I do, from my understanding, it is inspired by this kind of traumatic, disturbing picture you found on social media. You want to talk about that more?
So that, yeah, I mean that's more Joe's domain. He kind of came up with the sort of direction for us to go in, but essentially it came from him coming across a social media post of someone who had murdered someone else and
Mm-hmm.
returned to the scene of the crime several days later to like do take a selfie, standing in the blood of the person he murdered. And
Damn.
it was just kind of like, I think, embodied sort of the theme that we wanted to go in, which is like how we just consume images of like real life violence and how desensitized just sort of
Yeah.
being able to pick it up and pick up your smartphone and look at something horrific and put it back down and go about your day. And so just kind of the more you consume stuff like that, the more kind of dehumanizing it is for
Yeah.
you and for everyone else. So yeah, that's kind of, but yeah, that was the idea behind the title of the album, and kind of trying to recreate that a bit with the album cover as well, in a very literal sense.
Yeah. I'm glad, that's a theme of the record because, it even had me thinking, listening and reading like the press material you talked about and how like we almost are spectators of suffering, just seeing it through a screen. And
Mhm.
sometimes that's good, right? I think it's like sometimes like when you think about like maybe what's happening in Palestine, it gives a lot of awareness to it. But other times it's why are we why do we need to engage with this? Why do we need to consume it? And I don't think we ask that enough.
No, yeah, and nobody
Yeah,
has the answer to it, but you do feel like it's kind of, voyeurism of like other people's suffering, and you're just kind of
yeah,
like there as a spectator.
yeah.
So yeah, that was
Um,
the idea.
yeah, I love that. I also love the band name. Can we talk about it? Vacuous. When you look up like the Webster's definition, it kind of means to be void of substance, no feeling or thought behind anything. What does that mean to you in terms of the music?
Um, I don't know. It can mean a lot of things. The
Yeah,
like practical reality of it is that coming up with a band name that's not been taken is very difficult, and we were kind of like throwing a lot of names back and forth in the group chat. And Joe had it was like vacuous with another word behind it. And I was like, vacuous, that sounds cool. But I think we both gravitated towards it because it's really ambiguous. It's like, on the one hand, we overthink everything in our band, but we
Yeah.
also like are really spontaneous and we'll just like be like, yeah, fuck it. Like, kind of like there's not we can't always
Yeah.
justify what we do. So that it is kind of like, yeah, even me just trying to explain it to you, I'm like, this
Yeah.
is this is dumb. Like, yeah.
I hate to break it to you because
But
as
yeah,
I
go
hate to
ahead.
break it to you because as you were saying that, like, you wanted a name that wasn't taken, I got curious and I opened up Metal Archives and typed up Vacuous. And
Yeah,
sadly, there are
there's a
two other
deathcore
metal
band.
bands named Vacuous. There's a deathcore band and a black metal band.
Yeah. But yeah, I think
Yeah.
ultimately we both wanted a name that was like, not going to be like organ grinder or something that's going to
Yeah.
pigeonhole us into sounding a certain way forever. And yeah, we
Yeah.
wanted something that was really malleable.
Hmm. Well, the fact that a black metal band has also used the same name means that that name can be malleable. It means a lot of things. Yeah. Um, now I've read in other interviews, other medias where you guys have talked, and something you as a band have mentioned more than once is this idea of wanting to push death metal forward. Kind of break the boundaries. In what ways do you think Vacuous is doing that?
Yeah, I mean, maybe I'll like caveat that, like, as in, I don't think anything we ever do, we're not aspiring to like redefine anything or change, push the boundaries of the genre as a whole. I think we're just trying to approach it from a personal space of being able to filter our own different like influences, which may be
Yeah,
from outside of death metal through the lens of death metal. And yeah, I think a lot of people, have called us like, oh, Packies play old school death metal. And I'm like, that's kind of weird to me because like I wasn't born when, Altars of Madness and all the great stuff
yeah,
came out. I'm not gonna pretend like I've exclusively listened to that my whole life. And yeah, obviously like we've all had more, picked up more recent influences along the way.
yeah,
So yeah, it's just at the end of the day, it's just not limiting what we put into our music to what is perceived to be like as correct death metal. That's all it is. I don't think we have any aspirations to like redefine the genre or be that original in any way. Really, you don't have to be original to be good. Is another way I look at it as well. I don't think being original is that important in of
no, I think it
itself.
is an overrated concept. Yeah, I mean, when I hear you talking, it's like you're not trying to be like Gorguts when they put out Obscure. You're not trying to like just take death metal and just completely invert it, but you do want to do something that is very much you.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
I mean, I think at the end of the day, that's, I respect bands that are like, we've got a style and like this is what we're going for, and they execute it really well. Like
yeah.
one of my favorite death metal bands is Dead Congregation,
I was just listening to them the other day. They're just so goddamn good.
but like nothing they're doing is like new, and it's
Yeah.
been done by other bands like decades before them, but they just do it so well, and they know
Hmm.
exactly what they're doing that it's like I understand why people think that's one of the best death metal bands of like, this current era.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Um, but then again, you have like a band like Blood Incantation, which is like somebody doing something completely different,
mm,
and people praise it for that. So there is. I think you can have kind of both and at some points.
yeah,
Um,
and with the blood incantation thing, I mean, I feel like that's kind of setting a precedent for like, oh, if you want to evolve death metal, you've got to go in this kind of like artsy, progressive way. And I'm like, I don't think it has to be. That's not
no,
doesn't
yeah,
have to be the path you go down.
yeah, um, yeah. I like that. You mentioned some people trying to describe you as old school death metal, and that term
Mm,
gets thrown around a lot lately. Like the old school death metal revival, and I understand the terminology a bit, but also it's confusing me because I think people use that term to differentiate a new breed of death metal that isn't like metal death or deathcore, or like like tech death,
yeah,
kind of going back to more rootsier sound. But then I think old school death metal, nothing like your band or like I don't know, like a Tomb Mold or something, or bands like that. they don't sound at all like Obituary or Deicide. They just don't. They're something
Mm.
completely different. And I'm like, there has to be another way to describe this, right? I mean, old school just seems limiting.
Yeah, I don't know. I guess it's maybe
Yeah.
like this is gonna sound really pretentious, but like maybe like organic way of approaching death metal. I don't know.
Mhm.
I think I mean, even going just back to the old stuff, like, Deicide doesn't sound anything like Autopsy, who don't
No.
sound anything like Incantation. And it's like, what made those bands great? Or it's like there was no blueprint for them. They just had, like, they all listened to their own stuff
Yeah.
because there wasn't the internet. And they were just like, let's take what we like and make it extreme. Um, and I guess in a sense, we're old school because we're doing that. I feel like we're doing the same thing just from
Yeah.
the point of view of someone who came like 35 years later than that.
Hmm.
Does that make
Then
sense? Is that really pretentious?
no, no, I sub pretentious. This is okay. No, I don't think it is at all. Uh, and and you're right. And I'm thinking even bands that maybe like then is Atheist old school death metal because they are definitely doing something completely different and weird, but they are an older band. Like it's like you know,
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah. It's weird, but I think that's what's ultimately great about death metal is that like
yeah,
someone can call themselves a death metal fan. They can listen to it for years and years, but them and I could have spent our whole lives never listening to the same bands at all, or not being into the same things. Never really like crisscrossing our taste at all, which is crazy
yeah.
for
I
such a
mean,
niche genre.
Immolation is a completely different band than Suffocation. Suffocation's a completely different band than say like Necrophages, and all of those don't sound
Mm,
anything like At the Gates. It's just a very, very thing within this umbrella term we call death metal.
exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. Now you're a band, as you know, even as we talk, it seems very obvious that you are a band that is clearly aware and a fan of death metal from all eras and are aware of like the classic records. When you hear a death metal album,
Mm.
what is different about the ones that stand out, the ones that you remember versus a death metal album that you put on, you listen to, and then you kind of just forget about? Maybe it wasn't bad, but it just was average.
Yeah, it's not just one thing. I don't know. I think yeah, it's got to be some kind of atmosphere or vibe that I think is like I don't know, something that almost pushes it into like outsider art territory is what I really like in death
Yeah.
metal. Like, I was talking to a friend the other day about the band Infester from the 90s.
Okay. Yeah. I've heard the name. I don't think I've ever listened, but I know who you're talking about.
And yeah, it's like, yeah, I mean, they just did one album and broke up and kind of flew under
Yeah.
the radar. But check out their one album. Like, it's just really weird. And it's like, I know why this didn't appeal to a bigger audience. I think it's just the weirdness of stuff that I enjoy. And
Yeah.
ultimately, you can tell when a death metal band, when the people have written it to be like deliberately to be in the vein of a certain style. And like there's nothing wrong with that, with being like, oh, we want to do Swedish death metal. There's nothing wrong with that. But I just like being able to see like there's these people have put their personality into their death
Mhm.
metal.
I think I think you could do either or. There are Dead Congregation is a great example of a band who
Mm,
is trying to sound like something that has been done before, and then we remember it because it's so good. But
mm,
I think maybe that record stands out because it sounds like a band making the music that they are naturally wanted to
they
make versus trying to just
yeah.
do something to make the right product.
Yeah,
Uh,
exactly. No, you can tell that those guys like they're feeling what they're doing, and
yeah,
like I've seen them live, and it's like they're not they're not being this like an incantation type band. Like they are that band. Like
yeah.
it's legit.
And then when I listen to like a great band, one of my favorite death metal bands is Ulcerate. When you listen to them, obviously they're doing something more experimental, but
Mm,
I think their experimental death metal feels more. natural. Whereas I think other bands that try to do like a avant-garde disco death maybe sounds too forced or sounds too calculated. No,
Yeah.
it's just kind of that
Yeah,
sense I
yeah. I
get from
think
different records.
yeah, I think it's also like that right balance of like being self-aware of what you're doing, but not getting too caught up in it either, and just kind of being able to just like go for it, whatever, regardless of what you're doing.
Yeah. And then Obituary, like you go back to those records, they sound amazing because they were just dudes having fun. Like, and it was just like it felt so organic and natural. And like,
Yeah,
uh,
yeah.
uh, well, since we're talking about death metal, I mean, do you have like, I don't want to say what's your favorite death metal record because that's too hard. But like when I ask that question, are there like three or so that like just come to your mind right away?
Um, I'll probably well, I'll because I mentioned it already, so I'll mention Infestor to the Depths and Degradation, one of them.
Mhm.
Yeah, that like still go back to it for inspiration just because of how weird and unpleasant and bleak and just harrowing the whole thing is.
Yeah,
Yeah, I'd also probably go. I mean, I would be remiss to not go other direction and to say Heartwork by Carcass, like the most melodic, catchy. And it's like, I don't really care if it's death metal, melodeath, whatever. It's just fucking good. Like, and it was pretty pivotal record for me getting into this kind of music. It hasn't aged at all.
no,
Um, and then in terms of like, oh, am I just gonna? I'm just gonna have to say, yeah, the Dead Congregation album, like just because that in my sort of getting into music and realizing that I wanted to write death metal, that was a pretty important one for me. And it was like I'd gotten into the death metal classics like early
yeah,
on as like a teenager, but I'd never really gone into the undergrounds. And I was like, oh, like this is this is when like deathcore and stuff was big, and I was like, I'm not into any death metal
I've
stuff that's
never,
modern.
I've never gotten into that
And
stuff
then I was
either.
like, oh, there is like current death metal that's in the vein of the stuff I like.
Mhm.
So yeah, that was kind of a game changer for me.
Do you prefer Graves of the Archangels or Promulgation of the Fall?
Yeah. I've probably spent more time with Promulgation of the Fall because that was the
Sure.
first one I heard.
Yeah.
And yeah, the production's awesome on that one as well.
Yeah. I mean, I think they're both classic for a reason. I think the closing track of Graves of the Archangels, Teeth in the Red, is just one of my favorite
Yeah,
death metal tracks of all time. Just how it just kind of drags on, just get darker and darker as it goes. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. That and the first three tracks of Promulgation where they just run right into each other like seamlessly. It's just
Yeah.
perfect.
uh, I don't. When people ask me, like, they give you a desert island question, like, what a record you take. I don't see. It's a record that's. I don't know if it counts as a proper death metal record. Maybe more like blackened death metal, but I have a special place in my heart for "Hatred for Mankind" by Dragged into Sunlight.
Yeah,
Yeah, just one of the
yeah,
nastiest, most misanthropic pieces of music ever recorded.
100%. Yeah, and I think
Yeah,
that's like a really cool band just because
yeah,
like I've kind of been saying all along, like they're not squarely a death metal band. They're
no,
bringing in all kinds of. They've even got like stoner rock riffs like thrown in
sure,
there, but they're
yeah.
just doing whatever they want to do and just maxed out pretty much.
Mm-hmm.
I That's like the only live show I've had to walk out of though, just because it was that intense and they use like constant strobing, and I was with my partner who's quite sensitive to that, so we did not last the whole show, but they were very good. Other
Okay,
than that,
good warning because I will be going to a festival where they're at in a few months. So I've never gotten to see them. So I am
yeah,
looking forward
be
to
prepared for like
that. They're playing Hatred for Mankind in its entirety. So I am just so geeking out about that. Uh,
yeah, that'll be cool.
I don't. I think another record that I just have to mention because it's a record that people just like to name drop, but I think it's a record people like to name drop for good reason. Is Nespeth by Demolich or
Oh
Demolich
yeah,
or yeah,
yeah, crazy weird. That's the crazy like
yeah.
anachronism for like when it came out as well. It was just so ahead of its time. I don't think anyone knew what to do with it when it came out.
And I have a soft spot for the weird. Like I know what you said. I don't need it to be weird and artsy. I do love the new Blood Incantation record for that. And I think I also that's why I go back in time and think one of my favorite classic death metal records is Unquestionable Presence by Atheist, just because there's a band that like, hey, we know what death metal is now. How can we fuck with the formula as much as we can? You know?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, and I mean, I'm one of my favorite bands is Paradise Lost, and like
Oh yeah.
obviously went on to become like this completely different thing. But like again, they're at the kind of start of death metal, like looking at it through the lens of being like, how can we make this like gothy and kind of catchy? And yeah, I think that's cool.
Why do you think a lot of the bands in that band, you talk about your Paradise Lost, your Amorphouses, your
Mm.
Catatonias, why they all kind of change like that drastically over time? Like, what was it about that type of like death doom sound that pushed them into more like a goth metal or kind of even like from a rock territory?
Yeah, I don't know. I think there is like an appeal to
Yeah.
finding like darkness and heaviness with like softer palettes. And like
Hmm.
you've heard in his blood, like we put a little bit in of that in it as well. So yeah, like I think it probably becomes a bit of like a dare or a challenge to be like, oh, let's see if I can like have be like a dark and a heavy band, but by like using twinkly
Yeah.
soft guitars and keyboards. Like there's something cool about that.
I wonder if that's why a lot of black metal fans also have a lot of ties to like the neo folk or the Dungeon synth scene. It's like getting that same
Yeah.
kind of like emotions, but in a completely different instrumentation.
Yeah, yeah. I
Yeah.
think a lot of that stuff is interconnected and it appeals to the same people ultimately. Like
Hmm.
people who just like dark and atmospheric music. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, even for myself, like I primarily listen to metal. That's why I have a metal YouTube channel. But there'll be times when I'll hear like a dark ambient or even like a dub techno record. They're like, okay, yeah, this is kind of the feelings
Mm.
I like in metal, but I'm finding it in something completely different. Like that happens.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's always cool when you can kind of find some kind of tangent that sort of appeals to the same part of your brain that's made
Mhm.
you get into metal.
Now, for you personally, I always like asking this. So you're in a death metal band. Did like was your entry into metal hearing death metal, or did you kind of start with like like your priests and your Iron Maidens, or like what was kind of your pathway?
Yeah, I mean, I kind of got into, music and like for me, music and skateboarding like came at the same time. And it was just like I would listen to whatever was on skateboarding videos and what people at the skate park were listening to.
Hmm.
And this was like, bear in mind, this is like early 2000s.
Yeah,
So it was kind of a mix of like, you know, pop punk, new metal, and some classic like hard rock and metal. And I was
yeah,
not discerning at all. It was all just like rock to me. And I was
yeah,
like, yeah, I like rock music. But yeah, ended up kind of gravitating towards, the Metallicas and the Judas Priests and stuff. And yeah, I hate to be cliche, but like the turning point for me was like Slayer because I'm like, this is unashamedly evil, and it's
yeah.
like I can't even pretend that this is rock music. This is evil, and I'm into it.
One of my favorite things about Slayer is that like they kind of rose up during the Satanic Panic, and I think a lot of bands, even like bands like Iron Maiden, were trying to like say, no, 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 we're not devil worshippers, we're not a no, we're not an evil band, we're not satanic, don't cancel us, cancel your Dungeons and Dragons and whatever else you're mad at, but Slayer's like, yeah, what are you gonna do about it? We're an evil band,
Yeah,
yeah. um,
yeah.
the first thing that came up to my mind when he said, like being in the skateboarding, the same time getting into music, and like like even mentioning the pop punk. Were you into games as a kid? Did you play like Tony Hawk's, Pro Skater or like?
Oh, 100%. Yeah, yeah. Like
Yeah,
the soundtrack to that. Yeah,
yeah,
it had Rage Against the Machine. It had all
yeah.
all kinds of stuff. So yeah, that was kind of my entryway into music. Yeah.
surprisingly, and it didn't have the same musical importance, but I never really got into the Tony Hawk games. I played like the skate games, like on the
Mm,
360. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, I understand why those Tony Hawk games are so esteemed, and I want to go back and play them at some point. But yeah.
yeah, I never got good at skateboarding, and like I want to play guitar instead. So
Yeah.
yeah, um, but that was my gateway into it.
Hmm. Yeah, I grew up in an evangelical household. I was very sheltered, but I somehow discovered Christian death metal. It exists.
Well, is that like
uh,
anti-deicides types vibes, or
yeah,
I couldn't even like what is a Christian death metal band? I don't think I could name one.
okay, so the biggest one is probably a band called Mortification.
Right.
Um,
Okay. I've heard of that. Yeah.
yeah. They started out in '91, or they didn't start out, but that's when they put out the first records. They were not like late to the party, but it just sounded like a band that heard death metal and wanted to make the Jesus-y version. Um, I'm trying to think if I can think of any other Christian death metal bands. There were plenty of them. But well, there's actually a whole label dedicated to it called Bombworks Records. I only know this because I was a 12-year-old on the internet discovering metal music, but I had a pastor for a father. But bands
And
like
you're like,
yeah, Grave,
I need this to be I need this to be
yeah.
okay.
Bands like there's a band called Grave Declaration. There's a band called Seventh Angel. Um, there was a lot. There was also Christian black metal. Ancestor is like the big
Yeah,
name. Yeah, it's such a weird
crazy.
concept on black metal.
Yeah.
Um, but of course, at the same time, I was still in public school, so I saw and secretly respected kids who wore their Slipknot shirts or their corn shirts. I know I was in like middle school when that stuff was super popular. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. No, I was fortunate that like my parents were fairly open-minded. Like my mom took me to see my first metal show, which was
Interesting.
Motorhead. And yeah, like um me and my brother had a drum kit set up in my dad's attic and let us make all kinds of noise. So yeah, like
Yeah.
they're fairly cool with it, which I'm very grateful for.
Yeah. That is lucky. But that's good. I mean,
Yeah, no,
I'm glad
it's not
that
everyone's not
yeah.
everyone had that experience. I realize that.
I'm glad that the stigma is dropping. In fact, I think there even is a like I mean I still subscribe to Decibel, and I'm pretty sure like every yeah in the magazine like towards the beginning there's always a section where they'll interview like a metal musician's parents, like what did you think about your child
Yeah,
being in a death metal band, and they're usually pretty supportive.
yeah.
um
There you go.
anyway, those are all the questions that I had for you. But before I let you go, Michael, once again, thank you so much for joining me. I want to give you the opportunity to kind of take the floor for the ending here. Let people know where they can find your music, plug all your socials, and all that stuff.
So yeah, we've got our album coming out at the end of the month on 28th on Relapse. So
Yeah.
you can pre-order that from them on Relapse's website or on our Bandcamp, which is vacuousdeath.bandcamp.com. I think I got that right. Um, yeah, you can find like we're most active on Instagram of all social media platforms, so you can follow us there. In terms of plans, we've got a release show the day after the album comes out in London.
Okay.
And then we've got like a UK tour, like I think it's 9 dates in total in April. And yeah, some European bits dotted around like festivals later on in the year. But yeah, we'll hopefully get to do as much. Uh, yeah, hopefully people invite us to play in cool places and we'll do what we're able to do.
Yeah. Well, Michael, once again, thank you so much for joining me. To everyone at home, of course, always thank you to my patrons. you watching right now, make sure you look out for the new Vacuous record coming at the end of the month off of Relapse Record in His Blood. Keep it metal. My name is Maddie, aka Beaver Maj, and I'm out of here. Bye.